It landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning, sandwiched between system monitoring reports and a coffee break reminder from HR. At first, I thought it was a misrouted support ticket, but the subject line made me blink twice. Q3 transition plan, replacing Denning. I opened it without thinking, still half focused on a database maintenance script running on my second screen. My name sat there bolded and underlined in an email chain between Verena Shaw and two HR directors. She wasn't just recommending a reorg, she was outlining my exit, calling it a cost efficiency measure. Bullet points listed why the Denning role, as though I were a software plugin, could be consolidated under a more flexible, consultant-driven structure. Verena had only been promoted 2 months ago. She didn't come from engineering, she came from project coordination. The kind of person who used words like synergy and alignment to describe layoffs. I stared at the screen, my hand frozen over my mouse. No one had spoken to me. No performance warnings, no restructure meetings, just a tidy little plan to delete me like deprecated code. By lunchtime, the email had been recalled. Someone in HR must have noticed. Too late. I'd already printed it. 3 days later, I sat in the back of the executive review meeting while Verena clicked through slides of her new automation proposal, except it wasn't new. It was a metrics dashboard I'd designed 6 months ago when we were struggling to track real-time warehouse throughput. She'd renamed the files, stripped out my watermark on the interface mockups, and swapped the GitHub repo link for a static screenshot. No credit, no mention. Just a smile and a lot of vague buzzwords about modernization. Afterward, she passed me in the hallway and said lightly, "We'll need to talk this week about your role alignment. The company's evolving." The actual meeting happened Friday at 4:30 because of course it did. Her office smelled like fresh lavender and cheap diplomacy. She got right to the point. "Kala, your technical work has been appreciated, but we're moving in a different direction. You'll be transitioned out by end of month. It's not personal, just realignment." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. She kept going. "You're a strong coder, but the truth is what you do isn't irreplaceable. These systems are functional, but not particularly innovative. We need people who think more globally." My hand stayed folded in my lap. I don't remember what I said. I just remember how small the room felt, how the words not particularly innovative clung to the air like humidity. She handed me a folder with HR forms and talked about next steps. I thanked her quietly and left. No outburst, no defense. But as I stepped out into the fading daylight of the parking lot, something settled in me. Not grief, not anger. Something colder, something clearer. I spent Monday morning cleaning out my desk. No one asked questions. A few glanced over, offering the usual tight-lipped office sympathy, the kind that evaporates the moment the elevator doors close behind you. I returned their nods, smiled faintly, and kept moving. No drama, no whispers, just a quiet exit. In the cardboard box I carried, there were no family photos or mugs with my name on them, just a backup drive, a few handwritten notes, and a mechanical keyboard I wasn't about to leave behind. The backup wasn't full system code, I wasn't stupid, but it had every design decision schema map and logic tree I'd ever documented. My memory was better, but paper trails matter when people try to rewrite the past. I paused once on the way out, looking back at my workstation. 2 monitors, some sticky notes, and a whiteboard filled with pseudocode no one else on the team had ever bothered to decode. It wasn't arrogance, it was just solitude. Most of what I built alone. I built. No one ever asked me how the reporting engine reduced overhead by 40% or why the inventory scripts had failover patterns baked into them. They just knew things worked until they didn't. When I first joined Aerobridge, nothing was connected. The warehouse ran on spreadsheets and late-night panic. I changed that, quietly over time with code that didn't just function, it adapted. I never built for simplicity. I built for resilience, which is why I never worried about someone taking over. There was no backdoor, no malicious kill switch. That would have made me petty and, more importantly, vulnerable. What I created was honest a system that demanded understanding. You couldn't just poke around and hope to keep it alive. You had to know why each piece existed, what it was protecting, what it assumed, and what it would do if you broke those assumptions. That wasn't sabotage. It was architecture. By the time I walked out to the parking lot, the air had cooled. I placed the box gently in the back seat of my car, sat down behind the wheel, and breathed. They thought I'd crumble. They thought I needed the job more than the work. But what Verena didn't know, what no one did, was that I'd already made peace with this possibility months ago. And while she was planning her transition strategy, I was quietly sealing the structure behind me. Because not every door slams shut. Some you bolt from the other side, and some you leave just slightly ajar so you can hear what falls when you're gone. 10 days after I walked out of Aerobridge Systems, I was in a quiet cafe on the east side of town, sipping an oat milk latte and proofreading a code audit for a client in Portland, when my phone buzzed. The message was from Mikey Tran, warehouse lead, and one of the few people who ever really acknowledged what I did. "Hey, Kala. Hate to bug you. Just wondering any idea why the system's lagging like crazy reports or acting weird. Orders aren't syncing. Might be nothing. Just feels off." I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed a slow reply. When did it start? 2 days ago. Thought it was just our Wi-Fi, but today it duplicated an outbound shipment. Customers are getting wrong inventory numbers. I put my phone down and let the silence settle over me. My coffee had gone lukewarm. I didn't mind. They hadn't even made it 2 weeks. I opened my email out of habit. Nothing new from Aerobridge, of course. Verena had probably put a blanket do not contact order around me. Consultants had replaced me by now. Fresh eyes, new approach. I could picture the meeting slides with bright diagrams, someone throwing around words like streamlined architecture and low-code modules. Verena was probably telling the board everything was under control, that the minor hiccups were growing pains. Nothing serious, nothing they couldn't handle. I texted Mikey again. "Have they changed anything yet?" "Yeah. Some consultants said your validation layers were overly cautious and rewrote part of the logic to speed things up. But stuff's breaking more now. Weird, right? Not weird at all." The systems weren't fragile. They were interdependent. Each function built with assumptions, checks, balances, context. Remove a piece and something else would wobble. Remove two and it would lean. Push harder and the whole thing would fall flat. Still, I didn't gloat. Mikey didn't deserve that. He was just trying to keep orders flowing. "Hope it settles soon," I typed. "Let me know if you need anything." I closed my laptop and sat back. Outside, a delivery truck passed by, slowly rumbling down the narrow street. The irony didn't escape me. It was always easy to point at the scaffolding and call it clutter until the ceiling caved in and everyone wondered why no one had braced the beams. By the end of the week, 3 other messages had trickled in, all off the record, all variations of the same story. They were starting to realize that nothing stays functional just because it looks fine on the surface, especially when you don't understand what's holding it together. The job offer came on a Thursday afternoon wrapped in all the right language, flexibility, autonomy, competitive salary. A systems architect role with a private logistics startup out of Denver. The recruiter said my name had come up in multiple referrals. My work at Aerobridge, even without attribution, had started rippling out. It was the kind of offer I would have leapt at 6 months ago. Good money, better leadership, actual respect. But I didn't reply. Not right away. Instead, I stared at the blinking cursor in the draft window and thought about Verena's voice in that last meeting. What you do isn't irreplaceable. I wasn't bitter. That surprised me. I didn't feel angry, not really, just interested. Like watching a time lapse of a bridge sway before it collapses. You don't root for failure, but you don't look away either. Because there's something in the design and the flaw that tells you more than success ever could. 2 days later, Mikey texted again. Now it's bad. Invoices aren't matching product IDs. The reports are showing negative inventory. I told Verena and she said we'll escalate it to the consultants, but no one knows what that means. I think she's hiding how broken it is. I sent him a thumbs up emoji and let the phone rest screen down beside me. The thing was, I'd already written up a repair sequence, quietly, for myself. Just a logical recovery chain I mapped out in case the system failed exactly the way I'd warned about in the old design notes Verena never read. But I didn't offer it. Not yet. Some lessons only settle in after the third or fourth crack appears, when it's no longer a glitch, but a pattern. And some managers only learn the difference between simple and stable after the losses start showing up in red ink. The Denver recruiter followed up again. I told her I appreciated the offer but needed time. She understood. Smart companies don't rush smart people. That weekend, I made pasta from scratch. I went for a walk without checking server logs. I slept through the night for the first time in months. And when Monday came, I didn't rush to fix anything. I knew the next call would come. Not from Mikey, not from the consultants, from the one person who still didn't realize she'd knocked out her own foundation. The call came mid-morning just after I'd finished brewing a fresh pot of coffee. My phone lit up with her name, and for a second, I considered letting it ring out. But curiosity won. Calla Verena said, her voice attempting a professional calm that didn't quite cover the strain. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. You're not, I said, setting my mug down. What's going on? She hesitated just long enough to confirm she didn't want to make this call. We've had a few inconsistencies. Nothing serious, just some performance issues with the reporting system. I thought perhaps you might be open to consulting. Short term. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. Short term? Yes. Just to get things stabilized. The consultants are working on it. But she cut herself off. They've asked if you could come in, just for context. I let the silence settle before answering. I'd need to be brought in as an external consultant. $200 an hour, 5-hour minimum block. Payment up front. And I retain IP rights to any code I write or fix. Verena didn't respond immediately. I imagined her sitting at her desk, jaw tightening mentally, calculating what it would cost her pride to say yes. That's considerably more than your previous salary, she finally said. That's because I'm not your employee anymore, I replied. You're hiring a specialist. She paused again, then exhaled through her nose. Fine. Can you be here by 2? I'll see you then. I arrived just before the hour, dressed plainly, no laptop bag, no resume. Security still had me in their system. The front desk receptionist looked surprised, but didn't ask questions. Verena was waiting outside the conference room, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her perfectly polished image had dulled mascara, slightly smudged blazer, wrinkled at the shoulders. Thank you for coming, she said, avoiding eye contact. I'm billing starting now, I said, walking past her and into the room. 3 consultants sat inside, surrounded by empty coffee cups and printed diagrams. One of them stood up the moment he saw me. You're Calla, thank God. His name was Nolan, early 30s, clearly smart, clearly over his head. He pointed to a laptop and began showing me cascading errors, misaligned tables, dropped queries, validation flags being ignored entirely. The whole system was buckling. As he explained, I noticed something in the logs. Someone had removed the layered integrity checks I'd built. They weren't disabled, they were deleted. Who told you to cut these routines? I asked, interrupting. Nolan glanced at the others, then shrugged. Verena said they were unnecessary. Too many redundant steps slowing everything down. Of course she had. I didn't say anything. I just opened a fresh window, pulled up the backup schema, and got to work. It was going to take a while, but not because I didn't know what to fix. It was because they'd broken it so thoroughly, trying to prove I wasn't needed. I didn't speak much that first afternoon. I let the consultants walk me through their logic merging functions to streamline processes, skipping validation to speed up throughput, stripping out the caching layers because they didn't understand what it was doing. They weren't malicious, just inexperienced. They thought clarity came from cutting, not from understanding. The result was a brittle shell pretending to be a system. The reports failed because they'd eliminated the layered filters I'd built to catch inconsistencies. Data was leaking through tables, unverified, triggering false counts, duplicate entries, even null pointers. The inventory sync had slowed to a crawl because the caching buffer once responsible for shaving off milliseconds had been gutted. To them, every extra line looked like bloat. They couldn't see that those lines were protection, muscles, not fat. I started diagramming on the whiteboard, mapping out the original architecture. Layer by layer, I walked them through the intent, why this check depended on that flag, why this sequence mattered, why out-of-order processes would degrade accuracy by 30% or more. They stopped talking over me after the first hour. By the next morning, Nolan was taking notes. Actual notes. Not on his laptop, on paper. Every time I pointed to a segment of code and said, "This looks redundant, right? Watch what it breaks when you remove it," he blinked, nodded, and wrote it down. By the end of day 2, the errors had stopped. Inventory reports were running at 94% accuracy, up from 61% when I'd walked in. Response times had dropped by half. Orders were syncing again. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. They saw it. In the logs, in the numbers, in the way the system held together when touched carefully and crumbled when handled carelessly. They started calling it Denning logic by the second afternoon. A joke, I think, but not an insulting one. Verena peeked in just as I was finishing re-establishing the dependency chain between the invoice system and the central queue. Her eyes moved from the screen to the whiteboard where the original sequence diagram was pinned in color. She didn't say anything right away. Nolan did. "We're stable," he said simply, "because of her." Verena nodded once stiffly, then asked me to stay after the others left. The door clicked shut behind the last consultant, and Verena sat across from me, her expression controlled, but careful. She clasped her hands together like she was preparing for a negotiation, not a conversation. "I wanted to say thank you," she began. "The system is performing better than it has in weeks. Frankly, better than before." I let that sit. She cleared her throat. "We've been reviewing long-term options. I think it's time we talk about bringing you back. Full-time, a senior-level role. System architect. You'd report directly to me, of course. Significant raise. Equity. We could even build a small team under you." I studied her face. There was no smugness now, just fatigue and the kind of cautious respect that only comes after something breaks and you finally understand why it worked in the first place. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I'm not coming back." Her eyebrows twitched. "May I ask why I have 3 clients?" I said. "One of them is Aerobridge's parent company. They reached out after hearing about the system crash. I signed with them 2 days ago. I'll be overseeing infrastructure design across 2 subsidiaries starting next quarter." She blinked once tightly. "I'm consulting now," I continued. "No salary caps, no unnecessary meetings, no one cutting corners and calling it efficiency. I pick the projects, I choose the deadlines, and I retain full creative control over anything I build." Verena sat very still. "If we need ongoing support, my rate hasn't changed," I interrupted. $200 an hour, 4-hour minimum. I'll invoice weekly, and I expect documentation standards to be followed to the letter. No one touches my code without my approval." There was a pause long enough to hear the low hum of the ventilation system. She nodded. Slowly. Understood. I stood. "If the system holds through the weekend, I'll send over maintenance schedules. After that, it's your choice, whether you want to keep things working or roll the dice again." Verena didn't argue. As I walked past reception, the same security guard who'd escorted me out weeks ago gave me a quiet nod. This time, I was the one choosing the exit. But I wasn't walking away. I was setting the terms. 6 months passed. I barely noticed. Most days were a quiet rhythm of client calls, architecture reviews, and long, focused blocks of clean, uninterrupted design time. I worked from a corner desk at home by a window that caught the morning light. No clock-ins, no performance reviews, just results. Aerobridge became one of my regulars. They didn't call often, but when they did, it was prompt, professional, and always paid in full. Verena never pushed back on scope anymore. Her emails were short, respectful, sometimes even grateful. Once a month, she checked in never to challenge, just to ask. I had long stopped thinking about proving anything to her. That part of the story was finished. Now I was focused on Elior. He was a new hire fresh out of a small liberal arts college, self-taught in some areas, sharp but still green. Verena asked if I'd be open to mentoring him as he onboarded. I said yes, not for her, but because he reminded me of what I'd once needed, someone who explained not just how systems worked, but why they were built the way they were. Elior didn't touch code without understanding its context. He asked thoughtful questions. He didn't treat my architecture like a puzzle to solve, he treated it like a language to learn. And that mattered. On our third session, he said something that stayed with me. You write like you're protecting something, he said. Like every check, every fallback is guarding against something specific. I smiled. That's the job. He paused, then added, it's not just about making things work, is it? It's about making them keep working even when someone messes with it. Exactly, I said, because someone always will. We reviewed failover logic that day. I watched him sketch it out by hand the same way I used to when no one bothered to ask why the delays were necessary. Now someone was learning not just to copy, but to carry the design forward with care. That's when I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really was. It was about building systems that lasted beyond ego, beyond shortcuts, beyond managers who didn't understand what they had until it nearly slipped away. The work, when it's done right, defends itself. Maybe the best revenge isn't revenge at all, just never being that replaceable again.